Hey everyone, and welcome to the 6th episode of the Liam McCullum Show. This will actually be the second episode released this week. I'm releasing two together, and this one will be relatively short compared to the rest, but just as interesting, if not more. I'm having Greg Miller on from the Washington Post. He covers national security for the Washington Post and is the author of The Apprentice, Trump, Russia, and the Subversion of American Democracy. He published the book in 2018 through the Washington Post and HarperCollins and was among the Post reporters awarded the 2018 Pulitzer Prize for coverage of Russia interference in the 2016 election and the fallout under the Trump administration. Miller was also a part of the team awarded the 2014 Pulitzer Prize for public service for the paper's stories about U.S. surveillance programs exposed by former intelligence contractor Edward Snowden. I actually just found this out a little bit ago, and I am super intrigued. We're going to be talking today about a story that he broke mid-February just about this company that the CIA secretly owned and that sold encryption devices to countries and spied on them. I will ask a little about Edward Snowden and what it's like to be a journalist in the field, especially when dealing with stuff regarding national security. So I hope you enjoy.
Hello, it's Greg.
Hey Greg, how you doing?
Good. How's it going?
It's going well. You said in an earlier email that you were envious of people who lived in Missoula. Have you ever been?
Oh yeah.
That's awesome.
It's been a while though. I was out there visiting the journalism program one time, maybe 10 years ago or so. I haven't been back to Missoula since then. I've been back to Montana several times. I was in Bozeman and in Big Sky a year ago.
Yeah, it's a really great place to live.
Yeah, no kidding.
Well, yeah, I wanted to bring you on just to talk. I know you've come out with two articles since your breaking story in February. I want to talk about those articles as well as just what it's like being a reporter and dealing with like these stories that the magnitude is just crazy. So, but first off, can you give a little of your background?
How much background? Like, do you mean my journalistic background and just my job presently, or more than that?
Your journalistic background would be great.
Sure. So I am a national security correspondent for the Washington Post, which means I'm on the national staff here. My job has for many years been focused on covering U.S. intelligence agencies and the things that they do around the world. And so I've done a lot of terrorism-related stories, and I was an important contributor to the Post's coverage of Russian interference in 2016, and the Ukraine scandal that led to the impeachment of the president this past year. So I mean that's the sort of the focus for my work.
And did you also worked on the stories about Edward Snowden?
Yeah. So I was one of the reporters here at the Post who was involved in combing through the trove of documents that the Post got from Edward Snowden. Of course, that meant working very closely with Bart Gellman, who was the lead reporter on that package, and a longtime Washington Post reporter. And yeah, so the Snowden stories, the Bin Laden operation, the Russian interference, the Ukraine scandal, the impeachment of the president, these are all, it's been a busy time for a while for us.
And now obviously this crypto AG story. So can you kind of dive into that and basically tell us what this crypto AG company is, and what the CIA's role in it was, and what these encryption devices did, basically?
Yeah, so I want to caveat this by saying that it's a long and it's a convoluted story that unfolds over many, many decades. But let me try to boil it down. It basically comes down to the fact that for many, many years, there was a company in Switzerland called Crypto AG that sold encryption equipment to most of the governments in the world. These were devices or machines that would scramble communications, whether it's phone calls or messages, texts or things like this, scramble them into codes so that these governments' communications would be secure. When governments want to communicate, send messages to their embassies overseas, or to their spy agencies positioned abroad, or to their military bases around the world, they want those messages to be secure. And Crypto AG was a company that said, we can do that. We can make it so that your messages will only be read by your people, and nobody who's trying to grab them along the way will be able to understand what's being said. And it was the world's leading maker of this technology for a long time. What none of those customers ever knew was that that Crypto AG was secretly owned by the CIA for most of that time. Was secretly rigging those machines that were supposed to keep all of those communications secret, so that U.S. intelligence agencies could actually read everything that was being transmitted. So it was an enormous and long-running espionage operation with huge implications. I've covered this stuff for a very long time. I've never come across anything quite like this one.
Mm. And it seems that a lot of the employees weren't even aware of Crypto AG.
Totally. Totally. So this is a company, and it's functioning like a real company. To the rest of the world, it looks like a real company with a real sales team, with a real research and engineering department, with a manufacturing floor, and those are all real workers, hundreds of them, and none of them were ever told the truth. None of them was told that this is an actual CIA operation here that you're working for. They, as far as they knew, were working for a legitimate company. There were a couple of exceptions. This doesn't work unless you have a couple employees very high up. The chief executive of Crypto always knew. There have been a number of chief executives over the years, but each one of them knew the truth. They were told when they were brought in, this is a CIA operation. You're going to be expected to do certain things. But the rest of the employees were kept in the dark. And to me, one of the most fascinating aspects of the histories here, and we know this now because we obtained classified documents that trace the entire history of the program, that that part of the challenge of this operation was keeping those employees in the dark, and how much trouble it was and how hard it was at times to prevent them from figuring out what was really happening with the machines that they were building and selling all over the world.
Mm. And while reading some of your articles, it seemed that a lot of, at least there were some people like Bobby Ray, Inman, and people who wrote in these documents that actually seemed pretty proud of their endeavor, saying that it was the intelligence coup of the century. So what was the goal of the CIA? It started back in World War II. They got out in 2018. So what were they trying to achieve?
Yeah. So the goal here is to give the United States a strategic advantage in world affairs. Mm-hmm. And to do that by secretly knowing what other countries are saying and planning to do, what their spy agencies are planning to do, what their militaries are up to, what their embassies are up to. And so listening in to your adversary's communications tells you a lot about what they're planning, right? I mean, it gives you an enormous strategic advantage in the kind of global competition that among countries across the world. And of course, most of this transpired during the Cold War, so the stakes were very high across this period. And the countries that bought these devices and therefore were exploited by this operation included Iran, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and almost every country in the Middle East, most of the countries in Africa, a large number of countries in Europe, and almost every country in Latin America. Mm. So for decade after decade, more than half a century, the United States is able to read all of the traffic, all of the messages by those governments.
Right. So yeah, specifically, it says that they were able to see into the 1979 hostage crisis, and a lot of stuff going on within South America. So can you kind of talk about the types of human rights abuses that the CIA was able to see? I know you spoke about it in your second article on this issue.
Yeah. So I mean, there are when you have this much information and access to this kind of information, there are lots of ethical implications of that. You're going to be in position to witness or see or be aware of bad things that are happening in many places around the world. You're basically spying on governments that are run by dictators, by despots, very repressive regimes that are waging all kinds of very cruel campaigns. And one of the stories I wrote about this focuses on events that were happening in Latin America in the 1970s and 1980s, where military dictatorships that had been in power for many years were assassinating dissidents, were disappearing was the term for it, hundreds and thousands of members of opposition groups, perceived adversaries. And so when the United States, because of the crypto penetration, because governments, including Argentina and Chile and others, were using crypto devices, that means that the U.S. was able to listen to and track a lot of what these governments were doing. And when you have that kind of information, there's always this dilemma. What do you do with it? There's always a trade-off in the intelligence game. If you learn about something that's terrible, do you stop it? Do you try to intervene? Do you try to expose it? Do you report it, for instance, to the United Nations? Or do you protect the access that you have? In other words, if you take any of those steps, you might expose the way by which you learned about it.
Right.
That country is going to become suspicious. How do they know what we're doing? We need to change our practices. And so, there are huge ethical implications here for the United States and other governments, because when you look back at that history, there's really not a lot of evidence that the United States did much to stop, intervene, or call attention to human rights abuses in Latin America and other places that were extensive.
Right. And it seems that you said that China and the Soviet Union didn't buy these devices. They were suspicious in the first place.
Yes, so it's really important to note that, because as successful as this operation was, and in the documents that themselves it refers to this as the intelligence coup of the century, there were limits. Through most of the history of this program, the main adversaries of the United States were the Soviet Union and China. And neither of those governments ever used crypto machines. They had their own encryption systems. They were never going to rely on anything that was coming out of the West, even if even Switzerland or the United States didn't matter. They didn't trust that stuff, and so they didn't use it, and therefore they were not vulnerable. They were not exposed or exploited because of this operation. So as much as it helped the United States learn what governments all over the world were doing and track things that were happening, it didn't provide a lot of insight into what was happening inside the Soviet Union or China.
Right. Now, in your most recent article on this topic, you were mentioning how September 11th, and it was kind of like this intelligence failure. And I know Edward Snowden, in one of his recent memoir, he kind of talked about like this competition between the NSA and the CIA and how that goes back for a while, and they've kind of been bickering. And you mentioned that in your most recent article. Can you explain what that relationship was like through all of this?
Yeah. These documents that we have. They're almost comical in some ways, in the ways that they reveal the internal rivalries among the various agencies that were involved in this operation. I mean, in Washington, in covering these spy agencies, you come to understand that they have kind of distinct personalities, and that the CIA as always sort of the rival of the NSA. For listeners who might not know exactly the distinction there, the CIA is the spy agency we all see in the movies. It's the one that sends operatives overseas to try to steal secrets from other governments and other places. The NSA is a bigger agency, actually, and its job is to vacuum up communications. Its job is to suck up emails all over the world, radio transmissions, calls, and taking place across fiber optic cables under the ocean, to grab all of that stuff and sift through it for little pieces of intelligence. But these two agencies have always had this fractious relationship, and in the documents, there's lots of really juicy stuff where they're insulting one another. The CIA guys are constantly frustrated with the NSA operatives. How slow they are to move, how long it takes them to realize the potential of this, how sloppy they are when it comes to tradecraft. They're always sending too many people to meetings. They come in their own names. They're not operating under disguised identities. They're exposing this operation. And then on the NSA side, they're always like freaked out because they think the CIA guys are all just like reckless. They're too risky. They're constantly pushing the envelope of this operation and risking exposure. They're too avaricious. They want to spy on everybody and anything, even allies. So, there's lots of like little barbs and insults in the documents about the competition and rivalry between these two agencies.
And now I kind of want to get more into like what it's like being a reporter while dealing with all of this. What's it like when you get these documents? Or is there like a legal battle to achieve the documents? I know that you guys had to do that for the Afghanistan papers, but can you kind of explain what the process was when you were sifting through all of that?
Yeah, I mean, in this case, these documents are really rich, and they're somewhat lengthy, but not terribly lengthy, right? They're 100 pages or so, the CIA version, and then there's a companion one done by the German intelligence service, because this program was done in partnership with German intelligence. But, as a reporter, you get a document like this, and your first step is to basically read through it with an eye toward, well, what is the most important thing here? How revelatory is this? How big a deal is this? Okay, there's a lot of stuff in here that's really interesting. What is most interesting and why? To me, it only takes like 10 minutes to dive into these documents, and you understand what the real bottom line for the story is. There's this secret operation that the world has never learned about. And these documents lay that bare. It's no more complicated than that. I mean, the story we end up writing is a very long one. It's more than 200 inches in our printed pages, because there's so much material here. But the bottom line is something you would read in the very first few paragraphs.
Right.
For more than half a century, the CIA was secretly running a Swiss company that sold rigged encryption equipment to most of the countries in the world.
Yeah. Now, is the relationship with the CIA and the NSA, is that, I mean, especially since dealing with Edward Snowden and stuff like that, how has the relationship been when trying to find contacts within these agencies?
You mean for the reporting on the story?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's tricky. I mean, I've covered these agencies for a very long time, and there are other reporters in Washington who do this same job. And I think any of us would tell you that you never have a great deal of visibility into what's happening inside these agencies. They're spy agencies, and everything they do is secret. And all of their employees take lie detector tests in which they are asked, have you had any contact with a member of the press? I mean, it's against the law for them to tell us classified secrets. So it's quite a challenge, needless to say, as a journalist, to try to figure out what these agencies are doing and what's happening inside them. And you do that, by developing sources who can trust you over a very long time. So another reporting step when you encounter documents like this Having the documents themselves is super important because everything, all the facts that are core to the story are laid out there. You're not having to call somebody and trying to get them to tell you something. You already know the facts. They're laid out in front of you. But nevertheless, it's important to know people from these agencies who you can call and say, listen, I'm dealing with this material. It's fascinating and it seems very important. Can you help me make sure I'm understanding this part of it correctly and that part of it? Why would they have done this thing at such and such a time instead of something else, right? I mean, you end up with lots of questions that you want answered, and only if you have sources that you can turn to who trust you with them to protect their identities are you going to get those answers.
Right. And with this specific case, did the agencies just release the documents, or did you guys obtain them first?
No. So this is these documents remain classified. They are not publicly available. In fact, we didn't even post them on the Washington Post website. And the documents were really obtained through a reporting project partnership with a German filmmaker and documentarian named Peter Muller, and his name is on all the stories I've done here. And so it was only working through Peter and contacts in Germany that we were able to put these stories together. So this was a partnership and involving people overseas.
Okay, and now, just to start closing, what do you take from all of this? I know you won a Pulitzer for your information on Snowden and stuff like that. And I read your review of Edward Snowden's memoir.
Mm-hmm.
What do you take from all of this? Is there a really big concern for our security and our privacy, even though they've sold the company?
Yeah, not so. Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think that, and I try to write about this in the very first story. I try to say, look, this is the history of a program that, as far as we can tell, doesn't really exist anymore. It was finally closed down in 2018. So it's not active. It's not happening right now. But even so, it has relevance right now. It tells us a lot about surveillance and about U.S. spy agencies and about how they see the world and what they do. And so it connects directly, in my view, to the Snowden case. To me, the crypto story helps us understand how U.S. intelligence agencies developed their insatiable appetite for surveillance, how they came to kind of expect to be able to monitor the communications of governments all over the world, how that became built into their model. And the Snowden documents showed us how they've gone about that over the past 15 years. The crypto documents show us how they went about that leading up to that period. But it's all interconnected. And there's another important aspect of this, too, with a great deal of relevance now. I mean, there was a lot of suspicion about crypto for many, many years. Other governments became suspicious. They thought maybe there was something wrong with these machines they were buying. And the company and the United States government and the Germans were always saying, no, you guys are crazy, nothing to worry about. This is all on the up and up. It's a real company, don't worry. Well, I mean, we're having similar debates right now about other companies that are not based in the United States. The Huawei telecommunications company based in China is widely suspected of having very close ties to Chinese intelligence. And there's a great deal of worry by U.S. officials that the communications equipment made by Huawei is compromised to help China spy on the United States and other countries. There's a software, an antivirus company in Russia called Kaspersky. Many companies and individuals around Europe and the United States use that software, even though there's a good deal of suspicion that it's tied to Russian intelligence. So even though the crypto story appears to have come to an end, the kind of espionage that it represents is never going to end. I mean, we're someday probably going to look back at this moment now and read some crazy story about another compromised company selling devices relating to our phones or something that will be equally staggering and equally significant.
Right. Well, yeah, thank you so much for coming on. If you want to just tell people where they can find you, and yeah. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm not hard to find. I work for the Washington Post. You can look for the crypto stories. Just you can Google my name, Greg Miller, and crypto, and all of our stories on this subject are going to pop up. And you can also follow me on Twitter at Greg P. Miller.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Greg.
All right. Good luck with it.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you if you made it the entire way, and let me know what you think. I think that it could be fun to have more reporters on. I had Ian Johnson from the New York Times, or a freelancer for the New York Times, on, and now I've had Greg Miller on. Maybe I could bring some more on to talk about breaking stories throughout the year. I do plan on having someone on about the economy, or I might just do my own analysis of it. A lot's going on right now, and it's not what's going on isn't necessarily what everyone thinks is going on. So, and I do plan on having one of my cousins on who was diagnosed with cancer a while ago. We're going to be talking about his journey, his experience with God, as well as like what it's like to be standing in the face of death. I think that you'll really enjoy it. He's a great person to talk to. That should be my next interview. So please come back. Thanks so much.